amazing. I mean, it's just insanely good. That said, with Resolve Studio, you do get a few more features, which may or may not actually matter to you. One of the big ones that people look at is performance. Resolve Studio tends to take a little bit more advantage of your hardware, and if you're doing really high resolution stuff, working with RAW a lot, it might be worth it to upgrade just because of that. There's also a resolution limitation. DaVinci Resolve works up to UHD. You can use any kind of media, but you can only render UHD, whereas Resolve Studio renders 8K and above. There are also a couple of fancy effects, basically like really fancy tracking features, really fancy plugins, and that kind of thing. And Resolve Studio is $300, and at least so far, there have been free upgrades for each version. I bought the Studio version back in Resolve 12, and we're at Resolve 17, it was a free upgrade. So pretty good deal, $300. You get the fancy version of Resolve, but almost everything that we're going to go over today is in the free version. When you're ready to download it, you can click on one of the many download links, and it'll come up with some kind of window that asks, okay, do you want the latest like stable version or do you want the beta? The betas actually tend to be pretty stable in my experience. So I would definitely try this out first, Resolve 17, because there's a lot of cool features in the newer version. And that's what we're going to be working with today. One last thing to mention is because this is a video editing app, you are going to need a computer that has some pretty good hardware. I wouldn't expect Resolve to run real well if you have a system with like an i5 processor or less. If you have less than like 8 gigs of RAM, if you don't have a pretty decent video card, you kind of have to have some pretty good hardware to run either version of Resolve. You also have to have some pretty good storage. I mean, if you have 500 gigs or a terabyte or so, at least of storage you can play around with, that's going to be best for video editing because you do want some space to play around with because video editing does take up quite a bit of space. If you don't have that stuff, it's not going to work out real well for you. Okay? Okay, I'm glad we had this talk. Once you download and install Resolve, it's going to act something like this. You have this loading screen, and then you'll see this window. This is called your project manager, and this is where you open new projects, manage them, put them in folders, that kind of thing. And so what you'll probably want to do is go down here and click on New Project. It'll ask you what to call it. We'll call this Crash Course Resolve 17 and hit Create. Then it will throw you into Resolve. If you ever need to get back to the project manager, you can click on this little home icon down here, and that'll bring it back up. One thing to mention about this window right here, this is how you navigate your Resolve database. And without getting super technical, a Resolve database is just a place on your system where all of your projects live. If you've used other video editing apps, you might be used to saving your project in a specific folder and then trying to save your media in a specific folder and all of that stuff. Well, you still have to manage your media, but Resolve saves all of your projects in the same place, and it's just where Resolve likes it. If you guys want more details about that, let me know in the comments. But what you need to know is that you manage your projects here. If you want to import a project that somebody sent you, you can right-click here in the blank space and import a project there. You can also make a new project. And if you right-click on a project that you have open, you can do all kinds of fancy things like export the project for other people to use. You can even export a project archive, which includes media and everything that you need to share it with other people. Pretty awesome. But let's jump into actually doing things. When you open up a new project, your screen will look something like this. You're going to be opened up in the cut page. Now, Resolve is broken up into different sections called pages. You can find those down here, and each page is focused on a different aspect of post-production. So the cut and edit pages are made to do what you would normally think of a video editor doing, taking video clips, putting them in timelines, moving stuff around, and kind of building your edit. And whenever you click on a different page, it switches out the interface. That's because you need different interface things for different things that you're doing, right? The Fusion page is for special effects, for graphics, for basically fancy things. Anything that you would, say, use like Adobe After Effects for or Apple Motion, that kind of stuff happens in Fusion. Whereas the edit and cut pages, this is basically like what you would think of in Final Cut Pro or Premiere or Vegas, if you're familiar with other video editing software. The color page is all about color correction. The Fairlight page is all about audio. And the Deliver page is how you render things. It's kind of like if you've used Adobe Media Encoder or Compressor, this is where you take your project and actually export it so people can see it. This far left page is the media page. This is where you can import and manage media, adjust metadata, and do all kinds of nerdy things. So even though it opens us up in the cut page, we're actually going to start with the edit page. So let's click on edit, and we'll kind of walk through this interface as we build something. Over here on the left side, you'll see this gray panel called the media pool. The media pool is where all of the media for your project lives. This is video, audio, music, pictures, anything that you want to actually use in your project. So let's import something. The easiest way to do that is right-click here on the media pool and just go to import media. I have some footage here provided by our lovely friends over at raw.film. They're a super amazing website where you can download ungraded footage, raw footage shot on Red, and it's all just beautiful stuff. I'll also grab a couple music tracks from Artlist, which is my favorite stock music site. They make it super easy to find music for your video, and you can search based on video genre and feeling, and it's just a wonderful experience. But I'm going to select all of this and hit open, and that's going to throw this media over here in our media pool. So now we have this footage ready to use in our project, and we can preview it by mousing over any of these thumbnails, and we can see a little preview here in this left-hand viewer. I can double click on that and it'll stay, and I can kind of scrub through this. So this is just previewing the piece of media before I do anything. It's kind of just like opening it up in a video player. That's what this source viewer is for. Once I have a clip that I know I like, I can grab it and drag it down into our timeline. The timeline is where we actually edit things. This is where we put clips end to end, where we adjust the order of things, put them up in layers, make things shorter or longer. All of that kind of stuff happens here in the timeline. And anything that happens here in the timeline will show up in this right-hand viewer, which is called the timeline viewer. So this is what whoever watches your movie will actually see. And that's really the basic process of editing, is finding a clip over here in the media pool and deciding if you like it and which parts you like, and adding it to your project with the right timing in the timeline. So let's get a little more detailed on how this works. Right now, what we've done is just open up a clip here, make sure we like it, and then drag it into our timeline with the whole clip. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, because in the timeline, we can use our various tools and adjust things with the mouse to adjust how long a clip is. A really simple way is to just grab an edge of a clip, and that makes it shorter or longer. So if I want to cut out some time, let's say I don't want her to move to the other side of the table, I just want her setting down this glass. I can grab the edge of this and then trim that so that the clip ends right there. So now we have her just setting down that glass, and then the clip ends. If we have a blank space here, the person who watches our movie is going to see a bunch of black. So we don't want a blank space usually. An easy way to deal with that is just select this blank space and then hit backspace on the keyboard, and that'll get rid of things. We can also cut the middle of a clip using this tool right here, our blade. You can just select that and then click anywhere inside of the clips to cut them. Then we can select whatever clips we want and get rid of them with backspace, and select that blank space and hit backspace again to make sure we don't have a gap there. We can also make that a little faster by selecting this clip and hitting delete on the keyboard. That's like the little delete button. That will get rid of the clip as well as the space. Another thing to mention is when you trim the end of a clip like this, it will leave that space. But if you go up to this second icon here, trim edit mode, and you do the same thing, it actually kind of sucks everything down so that you don't have a gap. So that's a really quick way to make a bunch of clips shorter if you're needing to do that for your edit. And there's a ton of things here to learn, but we got to keep moving. If you're familiar with video editing at all, this will make a ton of sense. And if you're brand new to video editing, then the timeline is just where you decide what the viewer sees. The other thing that we can do is just pick a section of a clip before we add it to the timeline. So if I were to grab a random clip here, I can actually just grab part of this to make my life a little bit easier down here. So let's say we just want to see these balloons coming through the doorway. We don't really want to see her walking all the way across the room, right? Something like this maybe. We can set the start of the clip right here just by hitting I on the keyboard, I for in, and the end of it by setting an out with O, so O for out. And now we see it's just selected this section. So if I were to grab this image here and drag this down into the timeline, we just have that section. So that makes things a lot easier. Also, when you add things to the timeline, you don't have to just drag them down to the timeline. There's a few different ways that you can do it. One really neat way is if you grab it like this, instead of dragging it to the timeline, you can drag it over here